Imagine waking up one morning, stepping onto your porch, and spotting a luxury SUV parked right in the middle of your farmland, like it owned the place. That was my reality, and it wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't some lost tourist or a broken-down vehicle. No, this was the work of none other than Karen, our neighborhood's self-proclaimed HOA enforcer who believed every patch of land was hers to command. Now, let me set the scene for you. My farm sits right on the edge of the HOA neighborhood. I keep horses, a few cattle, and grow seasonal crops on the back acreage. There's a gravel driveway leading up to my house, clearly marked with private property signs in bold red letters. But apparently, signs meant nothing to Karen. She decided my land was community, overflow parking. Whenever her guests couldn't squeeze their shiny cars into her two-car driveway. The first time I saw her SUV idling on my field, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe she'd turned around and got stuck waiting. So, I knocked on her door politely and explained, "This is a farm, not a parking lot." She gave me that classic Karen smirk and replied, "It's just grass. What's the big deal?" That one line told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was entitlement. It only got worse from there. Over the next few weeks, I'd find not just her SUV, but her friends' cars lined up on the edge of my pasture. Sometimes they blocked the gate I used to move equipment. Other times, they tore up the soil after a rain, leaving deep ruts I had to fix before I could drive my tractor across. She acted like my farm was nothing more than a spare driveway for her personal convenience. I tried reasoning with her again. "Karen, this isn't just grass. This is part of my livelihood. Your cars are damaging the land." She waved me off with a laugh. "Don't be so dramatic. It's not like your cows. Care where people park?" That was the moment I realized, no matter how polite or logical I was, she wasn't going to stop. But here's the thing about farms. They're full of surprises. The land isn't just dirt and grass. It has layers, quirks, and hidden pockets. And after one particularly rainy week, I noticed a patch of ground near the edge of my pasture, where water pooled and the soil softened into mud. That's when the idea struck me. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to call the cops. I was going to let the land itself teach Karen a lesson she would never forget. I waited. Not out of anger, but because patience turns small plans into undeniable results. After the rain, the low patch by the pasture became a murky stain, a soggy trap hidden by tall grass and puddles. Karen saw opportunity where others saw danger. She treated my land like a free lot, and that arrogance would be her undoing. First, I documented the trespasses, photos of ruts, tire tracks, and cars parked across my field. Documentation wasn't for drama. It was to prove a pattern. I left polite notes on her windshield. "Please stop parking on private property." She crumpled one and tossed it in the trash. Then I made the land uninviting without harming anything. I dug shallow drainage furrows so the mud would stay unpredictable. I laid down roped markers along the path. Her guests used to gently reroute wheels, away from the soft ground. I moved a few stones and adjusted the approach to the gate so drivers would have to slow and notice the change. Subtlety was the rule. No signs that screamed trap. No nails. No hazards. On a Thursday night, when I knew Karen's driveway would be full, I switched on small battery marker lights along the rerouted edge. I positioned my tractor a little down the lane, visible but not blocking, enough to imply maintenance was underway. The plan relied on human nature. Insistence meets altered convenience. Her SUV rolled onto my field as expected, headlights cutting across the wet patch. The front tires sank an inch, then two. She revved. The car spun and dug deeper. Guests spilled onto the mud, shoes slapping, curses rising. Karen stormed to the fence line, fury perfect as her coiffure. "What did you do?" she demanded, as if the soil had personally conspired. I walked out calm, phone in hand with photos ready, and said, "The land did. You used it like a parking lot?" Her face flushed. Pride met consequence. The tow truck arrived later under yellow lights, and Karen's forced apology sounded thin. Neighbors whispered on porches. Her aura of entitlement had cracked. Word traveled fast. People love a good comeuppance. Still, this wasn't merely a prank. It was a message and a warning. I'd shown restraint, documented damage, and used the land itself to enforce boundaries. But notions of right and wrong often tangle with paperwork. I had to be ready for pushback and possible challenges from her or sympathizers. That night I sat on the porch with a warm mug, watching the tractor tracks dry into neat lines. The field had done its work. I'd started something that would ripple through the neighborhood, but the ripples weren't done yet. Some neighbors called. Others kept silent, watching. By sunrise, word had spread like wildfire. In neighborhoods run by HOAs, gossip moves faster than any official notice, and Karen's late-night mud battle was the headline everyone craved. Folks who once tiptoed around her started whispering in grocery aisles and sharing smirks when she passed by. Even the mailman asked with a grin, "Heard you had some unexpected parking issues last night." But Karen wasn't laughing. Oh no, she doubled down. The next afternoon, she marched up my gravel driveway, clipboard in hand, like she was the sheriff of the county. Without so much as a hello, she started rattling off supposed violations. Your fencing is 2 inches taller than HOA regulations. Your tractor creates noise pollution. And your barn? The paint color isn't HOA approved. I nearly choked, holding back a laugh. My farm wasn't even part of the HOA. I'd bought my land long before their precious development cropped up. The HOA rules stopped at the edge of my fence line. She had no authority here, but that didn't stop her from trying. I calmly replied, "Karen, you don't get to enforce your HOA rules on private farmland. You parked on my property. You caused damage. And I've got the photos to prove it." That shut her down. Momentarily. She huffed, spun on her heel, and stomped off like a storm cloud. Still, I knew better than to underestimate her. Karen was the type who thrived on conflict. If she couldn't bully me face to face, she'd find another way. Sure enough, the following week, I started receiving letters, not from the HOA, but from a local code enforcement officer. Anonymous complaints had been filed about unsafe conditions on my farm. The officer arrived one morning, clipboard in hand, ready to inspect. I greeted him with a smile and a stack of neatly organized documents, property surveys, maintenance records, and photos of my fully compliant setups. After a thorough look, he shrugged and said, "Everything's up to code. Whoever filed this is wasting my time." He left, shaking his head, clearly aware of what was going on. That's when I realized Karen wasn't just embarrassed, she was plotting revenge. She wanted to drag me into a mess of red tape, hoping the hassle alone would wear me down. What she didn't know was that I'd been through worse. Farming teaches you patience, and patience outlasts pettiness every time. Neighbors started to notice the pattern too. Some even pulled me aside at the feed store and whispered, "We've had our run-ins with her too. Glad someone finally stood up." For the first time, it felt like the community wasn't afraid of Karen anymore. But Karen wasn't finished. She was about to take things to a whole new level, one that would backfire in a way she never saw coming. Karen wasn't just embarrassed, she was furious. And when people like her get furious, they don't retreat, they escalate. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. If complaints and threats didn't work, maybe a show of force would. It all started on a Saturday morning. I was feeding the horses when I heard the rumble of engines. Not tractors, cars. I walked to the front of my property and saw them. A small parade of shiny sedans and SUVs pulling right onto my field. One by one, they parked neatly in a row, as if Karen had organized some kind of neighborhood gathering. And at the front of it all, Karen, arms crossed, wearing her sunglasses like a general surveying conquered land. "Community picnic," she announced smugly when I confronted her. "Since you don't use this field properly, we've decided it's the perfect place for an HOA social. You should be thanking me for bringing people together." I was stunned, but not surprised. This was classic Karen. Twist the narrative, claim ownership where none existed, and dare anyone to challenge her. But while she was busy setting up lawn chairs and coolers, I kept my focus on one thing: the soft ground from last week's rain. See, the patch that had swallowed her SUV wasn't a fluke. That area always stayed wetter than the rest because of underground springs. Anyone foolish enough to put weight there risked getting stuck. And now, half a dozen cars were lined up right across it. I didn't say a word. I simply went back to my chores, all the while keeping an eye on the crowd. For the first hour, they laughed, grilled hot dogs, and acted like my land was some public park. But as the sun rose higher, I noticed the telltale sinking. Tires pressing deeper into the earth, frames lowering ever so slightly. The ground was reclaiming what didn't belong. It wasn't long before the first guest tried to leave. They revved their engine, mud splattered, and the car barely budged. Another tried backing out. Same result. Panic started spreading. Laughter turned to frustration. People were yelling at each other, calling tow trucks, pointing fingers. And there was Karen, frantically waving her arms, insisting, "It's not my fault. The farmer must have done something. That was my cue." I calmly walked over, phone in hand, recording everything. "No traps," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Just soft ground. I warned Karen weeks ago this isn't a parking lot. You all chose to ignore the signs." The look on her face was priceless. She knew she couldn't spin this. With multiple witnesses, video evidence, and half the HOA stuck in the mud, Karen's little power play had turned into a public humiliation. But the real twist: the tow trucks wouldn't be the end of it. This mess had opened a door to something bigger. A reckoning Karen never expected. By the time the tow trucks arrived, the scene looked like a disaster zone. Mud-splattered cars sat at awkward angles. Some sunk almost to their bumpers. Neighbors stood in small groups, arms crossed, shaking their heads. What was supposed to be Karen's triumphant community picnic had turned into the HOA's most embarrassing moment. Tow operators trudged through the muck, shaking their heads and muttering about the messy job. One even joked, "Looks like Mother Nature set the trap." That got a chuckle from the crowd. Everyone except Karen. She was pacing back and forth, phone glued to her ear, trying to salvage what little dignity she had left. But here's the thing about dignity. Once it sinks, it's hard to pull back out. Just like those cars. I stayed calm, leaning on the fence, camera rolling. Every spin of the tires, every splash of mud, every frustrated yell, all of it went straight to my phone. Not because I wanted revenge, but because evidence speaks louder than opinions. And Karen loved to twist stories. This time, there'd be no twisting. After the last car was dragged out, the field looked like a battlefield. Deep ruts, torn grass, and mud pits stretched across what had once been a usable pasture. Karen stormed up to me, eyes blazing. "You're going to pay for this. I'll sue you for damages." That's when I smiled, pulled out my folder, and handed her copies of everything. Photos of the no parking signs, timestamps of her SUV sinking, notes I'd left, and the video I'd just recorded. I said calmly, "Actually, Karen, these damages are your responsibility. You knowingly trespassed. And now I have more than enough evidence to take this to court." The crowd went silent. All eyes were on her. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. For once, the HOA queen had nothing to say. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was worse than the mud. HOA members, furious at being dragged into her stunt, voted her out of her committee seat. Neighbors who once followed her lead stopped answering her calls. Even the local code enforcement officer, tired of her false complaints, warned her about filing frivolous reports. As for me, I filed a claim for the property damage. Karen ended up footing the bill for the repairs. Watching her write that check was the sweetest moment of all. Now, when I walk past that patch of land, I don't see just mud. I see justice. Justice served by the land itself. And a reminder that sometimes the best way to deal with arrogance is to let it sink under its own weight. And Karen? She hasn't parked anywhere near my farm since.